Welcome to this special Civility Dispatch episode of the Cultivating Civility Podcast. I'm your host, Diane Kalen-Sukra, and today, my message to you is that civility is strength, not weakness. In an age of rising incivility, governing has become increasingly difficult. Public officials face harassment, threats, and institutional paralysis, and the temptation to respond in kind, to meet hostility with hostility, is stronger than ever. But when leaders abandon principle for gain, they don't restore order. They deepen the chaos. And this is where true civility comes in, not as a nicety, but as the strategic foundation of effective governance. It is what allows communities to function, keeps debates constructive, and enables leaders to make tough decisions while maintaining public trust. Civility is not niceness, it's leadership. This was a central theme in my recent conversation on the How to Really Run a City podcast with Philadelphia Citizen co-founder and editor Larry Platt and former Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter and Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed. We discussed the civic consequences of rising incivility, how hostility in public life is affecting governance, and what it takes to push back without losing the principles that make governance possible. A key point I highlighted in our discussion was that civility is not niceness. It is not about simply being agreeable, but about engaging with strength, integrity, and accountability in public life. Civility is what allows people with opposing views to coexist, challenge one another, and debate fiercely without resorting to coercion, authoritarianism, or destruction. It's what ensures that governance remains possible even when divisions run deep. Some argue that civility is obsolete, that the only way forward is to meet political opponents with ruthlessness, cunning, and guile, as was articulated in a recent article by the nation's justice correspondent, Elie Mystal. Ruthlessness, cunning, guile, these are the skills the thinkers of the future need, he says. We're going to need wartime consigliaries, people who understand how to fight the enemy at their own game, people who can play the media like a fiddle, people who can win the crowd even while they're losing their precious, quote-unquote, intellectual consistency. People who will use any means necessary, fair or unfair, to advocate for the restoration of freedom and liberal self-government. They take the justifiable sentiment expressed in the podcast episode by former Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed that you can't nice your way to victory and push it even further. They argue that democracy is a battle of power first, where the ends justify the means and civility is nothing more than a constraint for the weak. Mayor Reed's point speaks to a frustration that many leaders feel, that toxic behavior too often goes unchecked and is rewarded with winning. And he's right. Niceness is not what it's going to take to push back and break through. We need more outspokenness, more courageous civility. But this idea that civility is simply niceness is a fundamental misunderstanding of what true civility is. In fact, the greatest leaders were civil. History shows us that they were not ruthless manipulators, but those who combined moral courage with strategic wisdom. For example, Abraham Lincoln, in the midst of the brutal Civil War, famously said, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" He understood that governing was not simply about winning battles, but about building a nation that could endure beyond the conflict. His House Divided speech didn't win him immediate victory, but it transformed the consciousness of a nation, carrying him into the presidency in 1861. Nelson Mandela, who led South Africa out of apartheid, refused to descend into vengeance despite decades of murderous oppression. He wielded civility as a tool of power, forging reconciliation while holding those who had upheld injustice accountable. His leadership was not soft or weak. It was unyielding in its commitment to justice while refusing to let hatred dictate the future. Picture Mandela's first day in office as president after 27 years in prison, facing his oppressors turned staff now. Take a listen.
Now, of course, if you want to leave, that is your right. And if you feel in your heart that you cannot work with your new government, then it is better that you do leave right away. But if you are packing up because you fear that your language or the color of your skin or who you worked for before disqualifies you from working here, I am here to tell you, have no such fear. What is Rabbi is Rabbi. The past is the past. We look to the future now. We need your help. We want your help. If you would like to stay, you would be doing your country a great service. All I ask is that you do your work to the best of your abilities and with good heart. I promise to do the same. If we can manage that, our country will be a shining light in the world.
Civility is not about being agreeable or avoiding conflict. It's about engaging in conflict productively. It does not mean surrendering or silencing oneself for the sake of politeness. It means having the strength to stand firm on principle while rejecting the tactics that undermine trust and democratic stability. Civility is the difference between strong leadership and reckless power seeking. It is what allows a leader to win not just an election, but the ability to govern effectively afterward. Winning by any means necessary may secure power in the short term, but it erodes legitimacy, trust, and the ability to build anything lasting. During the podcast, I had an opportunity to point to true civility in powerful and effective action. Mayor Michael Nutter's direct and unflinching address to the community in response to the youth flash mobs that had shaken Philadelphia. He didn't just call for civility, he demonstrated it, speaking hard truths with deep sense of responsibility and care. True civility isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about having the courage to tell people what they need to hear because you care about them and the community you share. His speech held families and communities accountable while reinforcing the need for strong enforcement, and it worked. His approach ended the flash mobs in Philadelphia at a time when other cities continued to struggle with them. This is the essence of true civility, not passive politeness, but leadership that sets boundaries, demands responsibility, and cultivates the conditions for communities to thrive. As I said in the podcast, had Mayor Nutter responded with simple niceness rather than true civility, the consequences would have been disastrous. Niceness is a form of agreeableness and pleasantness that you might want at a picnic, but when you're dealing with very serious issues like the flash mobs and violence, if you approach it with niceness, people are going to assume either you don't care, you're incompetent, or you don't have a plan. We need more outspokenness, more upstandards. Too many civic leaders today have not been as outspoken as they ought to be, and silence is not neutrality, it's permission. Larry Platt nailed it when he said politics at its best is an argument. It should be a civil argument, but we should be debating ideas and disagreeing instead of following dear leader. A garden left untended does not remain neutral. It becomes overrun with weeds. Likewise, when leaders fail to call out destructive behaviors, engage in robust disagreements, uphold civic values, or interact directly with their communities, they create space for toxicity to thrive. Too often, leaders hide behind administration or communications departments, issuing carefully worded press releases instead of speaking directly and boldly with the people they serve. When leaders retreat behind bureaucracy instead of confronting issues and incivility head on, they're not just staying neutral, they are allowing incivility to take root. Civic leaders are not just policymakers, they're culture shapers. Civility is not passive, it's an active commitment to shaping the environment where democracy can survive. If leaders are unwilling to engage, set the tone, and hold people accountable, they leave a void that toxic forces will fill. Now is the time for bold leadership. Leaders must not just enforce civility, but actively cultivate it, calling out destructive behavior, resetting civic norms, and creating the conditions where democracy can thrive. Without this commitment, governance will continue to erode. We cannot afford to be passive observers. The time to reclaim civic culture is now. Tune into my conversation with Mayors Nutter and Reid on how to run a city, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you. I'd like to invite you to join the Cultivating Civility Masterclass, a one-of-a-kind, on-demand, self-paced, online program designed for busy civic leaders, just 4 to 5 hours to complete. Inside, you'll gain a step-by-step roadmap to renewing civic culture, a civic culture assessment tool, exclusive insights from over a dozen visionary civic leaders worldwide, a masterclass certificate, and the Cultivating Civility Leader Golden Seal, and so much more. Enroll today at kalenacademy.com/civility masterclass. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Cultivating Civility Podcast. Please feel free to share and subscribe. Until next time, let's keep cultivating civility one conversation at a time.